Nice. Okay, let's get started, and if more people join, then they can come and ask questions at the end if they have any. Thanks everyone in the audience for coming in, and thanks Craig and Carl for joining. We're going to hopefully keep doing these weekly grants AMAs every week and host them on Discord or Twitter Spaces or whatever we decide to do. But we've got Craig here, also known as Zero XCLR, who, as a lot of you know, on Discord, who is an endorsed delegate and who's been pretty active in the community over the last 6 months or so, which has been awesome to see. I think just to give you some context, obviously, from Craig's standpoint, he has produced this piece of research on risk parameters, which is awesome. I encourage you to all read this in detail. I think it's, at a high level, really interesting just from a protocol standpoint and DeFi in general. And so Craig will be talking about this with a few questions from us today, and I'm sure if anyone's got any questions in the audience, then feel free to raise your hand. And then, as usual, Carl will probably be talking about grants a little bit at the start prior to Craig going into detail about kind of everything research. And Craig, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Craig has been in derivatives trading since around 2007, has started his career as a market maker, worked I think then and became kind of buy side and joined a hedge fund and spent there a few years as a trader, which is really interesting. And now he's got his own research firm called Considered Finance, where he's got a grant or two from dYdX grants, and it's super interesting to see the direction that he's going, and I'm sure he'll talk a little bit in detail about that over the next kind of half an hour or so. So maybe, Carl, if we can start with you, it might be just worth just talking about dYdX grants and any updates from there.
Yeah, for sure. As always, thank you so much for helping us host these events and kind of running them. For anybody who's new to the AMA setting, the goal of the grant AMA is really to highlight completed grants and give the grantees a platform to discuss their work and themselves, their backgrounds, and any sort of future contributions that they would look to do for dYdX, and to just kind of give everybody a sense of what it's like to work on a grant and what are the challenges, the pros, the cons, that sort of thing, and provide an open setting for both the grantee and potential future grantees to discuss the experience, while also really digging into the awesome work that's being done by our grantees, which today is OXCLR. Just to give a quick update on grants, some of you may have seen our proposal to renew the grants program as it is today. The current version of Grants V1.5 is going to expire, having been approved for 6 months later in February, so around February 15th, I believe it is. And so we're just trying to get ahead of that by getting approval and endorsement from the community to effectively keep running. There's a few changes being made, so I recommend anybody interested in kind of digging into that to head over to Commonwealth and their community treasury section, and you'll see our proposal there. But otherwise, we're still heads down looking at new applicants. We still have lots of applications coming in and new considerations. Our budget is still very focused on international growth, while also looking at research topics on important protocol parameters, very similar to what OXCLR has done today. And so his grant is actually a perfect example of really insightful research that can help drive community ownership and kind of management of these parameters as we start to head into V4 setting. With that, I think we can kick it off with Craig.
Yeah, Craig, thanks, Carl. That was really, really insightful. I think it's really important for people to check that post out on Commonwealth. So really encourage anyone here to go to Commonwealth and comment on the dYdX grants post. It'd definitely be helpful to have an endorsement there from a dYdX standpoint. Craig, I think it would be great just for you to start with just a bit of background about yourself, what you're interested in, why you did this research paper.
Sure. As you mentioned earlier, I have actually been involved in derivatives trading for a long time. out of university, I studied maths at university, and I joined interest rate derivatives team. But actually, I was in IT at that time, working as a product manager. But I'd always had my eye on the trading team, and sort of made that known until it came to be. And then it was kind of an interesting journey from there, seeing derivatives trading at an institutional level from both the market making side and the other side over the next few years, until I think I got too deep down a very small niche of South African interest rate derivatives, and I hit a point where I just had to make a hard left turn and do something else. So I briefly worked at a startup, but I couldn't actually. Once I'd gotten over my period of not wanting to work in the kind of trading side of finance anymore, I just couldn't sort of take my eye off DeFi, and I was spending my evenings looking into different elements of it more and more, and that kind of led me down the rabbit hole to sort of where we are now. So yeah, like along that way, I discovered dYdX, I think like everyone else, probably around about the time of the airdrop, just getting a lot of traction, and I thought it was pretty interesting that it was the only on-chain limit order book. I've obviously dealt with limit order books for a long time, so it felt like a more natural way to trade these products. I still believe that. I think it's a way better means of forming prices and price discovery, and if there's ever going to be a primary market where the price is set, I think it's got to be through a limit order book. So I found the project dYdX very interesting and started using it, and eventually sort of digging into the docs, seeing exactly how the protocol worked, just to make sure that there was nothing, that all was above board. And that was sort of how I came across these risk parameters in the first place a while ago. And at that particular point in time, I thought that they were very much too conservatively set. So I started to think about how that could change, and eventually applied for a grant to research it at the time. I mean, the parameters have subsequently been updated to be slightly less conservative, just to be clear.
No, that's awesome.
And yeah, that's me, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Thanks, Craig. That's super interesting. I guess starting off with like a broad related question, just for individuals who maybe are traders but don't fully understand kind of the risk parameter aspect in DeFi. Like, why are risk parameters important, and why are they needed in an exchange like dYdX?
Yeah, that is a great question. Let me start actually by just explaining where the risk comes about, because if it's hard to justify why something exists if you don't know what the negative consequences could be. So dYdX obviously is a derivatives exchange, which therefore permits leverage. And when there's leverage, the losses can be greater than the initial capital put in, or greater than the margin in the account. So there's, and if that happens, that loss needs to be covered from somewhere. So there are safety pools and an insurance fund and all things like that. But ideally, you don't want to use those except for in the most extreme situations. So what the risk parameters help to do is just control trading activity as little as possible, but to make sure that the edge cases where the order book gets overwhelmed, or any negative, just basically make sure that nothing negative happens on the exchange at a high level. There's actually one other risk, which maybe I'll reiterate a few times, but it's perpetuals in particular, unlike futures which have an expiry every quarter or whatever. Those futures have an actual hard arbitrage, where, because they have to converge every 3 months or whatever, their prices naturally track very closely. The perpetuals arbitrage, the way that it works is a little bit weaker, and therefore a little bit more work or a little bit more care needs to be taken to make sure that the prices don't diverge too much, and the risk parameters can also help there a little bit. And that's the second one.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, that's super interesting. So essentially, sort of talking about depegging of the price there.
Exactly. No one wants that. That causes all sorts of secondary issues, and it's a poor trading experience. So it's basically avoid losses at liquidations and avoid price depegging are the main reasons. A third one is actually also to avoid potential exploits. That is another risk vector that these can help control.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cool. I think next bit then is kind of specific risks and how they materialize. Like how are they mitigated or reduced then?
Let me start with how they materialize.
Yeah.
A very good example of that is actually the mango markets exploit. In my opinion, there was a complete lack of risk controls in mango markets, which allowed the exploiter to take an extremely large offsetting position in two accounts that he controlled of something. If I remember correctly, it was like 30% of the mango token supply or something ridiculous like that, which made it, if he could manipulate the underlying market, one of those sides was not going to be able to get liquidated and the other side was going to be extremely profitable. And that was essentially the exploits that he was able to do. If you limit the allowable sizes to something reasonable, which is going to be far lower than 30% of the total issuance, that exploit is no longer possible. So that's one example. But parking exploits, there's again, the major cause is the order book being kind of overwhelmed. So it could be overwhelmed in terms of excessive liquidation volumes, where if there's an order that is too big for the order book to actually clear at that given time, there's the chance that with the market moving that that order will not be able to be liquidated before the underlying collateral is all consumed, and then that would lead to bad debts needing to be covered from somewhere in the protocol. And yeah, obviously no one wants users' funds that are just in the smart contracts to be used for that. And then there's also, obviously, I've mentioned the price depegs. There's lots of examples of where that's happened quite detrimentally, and people have had to keep iterating on various risk parameters to try and get the markets to converge again.
Right.
Sorry, and I must just say, like, generally, when I say many examples, this is not on dYdX, this is externally.
Yeah. And then, yeah, in your paper, kind of on that one specifically, you mentioned kind of how Perpetual Protocol, their V1 depegged in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, they had a very interesting design. So obviously they didn't have the limit order book, which I've mentioned before, I'm quite a big fan of. They had something called a DAMM, where through some interesting, they basically, through an interesting accounting scheme, the price discovery would happen against the protocol, but the protocol didn't need to put up a huge fund against it. I don't want to get too much into the details, but it was very susceptible to something like this, and that's exactly what happened. If anyone knows Drift, the protocol that was on Solana, something very similar happened to them in the Luna market around the crash. So yeah, that's what happened in those cases, and it just meant that liquidations can't happen if your perpetual prices, in those cases, multiples of percents off the underlying price. You can't actually you can't liquidate orders at any kind of reasonable level, and trading almost becomes ceases. It becomes completely illiquid.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you briefly touched on kind of some common risk mitigants, but I guess like any more detail that you want to kind of talk on about, like how risk in particular is mitigated or reduced, or maybe specifically also like for dYdX on V3 currently?
So the paper itself just analyzes the margin risks, which sets how much leverage an account is allowed to take given their position size. But there's many other risk mitigants. Let me start with dYdX. They have a smart liquidation engine, which is very crucial in mitigating these liquidation risks, because what it essentially does is it just instead of just blasting the order book and completely overwhelming it, it sort of looks at it and executes the way a trader would execute this liquidation a little bit, taking a little bit of what would you call it? It would be more subtle about the liquidation rather than just naively trading until it's all done. So that in my opinion does a lot of the heavy lifting. It sounds like a small feature. There's also a lot of it's just dYdX is a well set up protocol. There's all the liquidations, collateral, everything like that happens against the external Oracle price, which mitigates manipulations on the exchange. It also not just manipulations, but even if there's a bit of a depeg, there aren't going to be unnecessary liquidations or anything like that. And then there's a pretty sizable insurance fund on dYdX that I don't know if everyone's aware of, but it's, last I checked, it was about $18 million. So that's, that can cover quite a lot of losses as long as there's not a major exploit or a hack or something like that. And then on top of that, some other potentials that I would think about considering is just putting caps on how far away from the underlying index trading is allowed. That just sort of helps with the depeg situation, and I think that's maybe the major next step at that, and maybe allowing the maintenance. This is a bit technical, but allowing the maintenance margin to also scale with position size, not just the initial margin.
No, that was
let me leave it at that before it gets too in the weeds.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful to understand. I guess then taking a slightly different direction in terms of thinking about things from like a DAO and community standpoint. Like when you think about risks in V3 versus V4 and potentially how the community will play a role in V4, in your opinion, what is the optimal solution here? Is it kind of a group of individuals? Is it like a notable group? Like what's the most optimal process here in your opinion?
That's a very complex question. So I'll try and answer it just kind of quickly. I believe a hybrid approach is the best. If it's a group of individuals, it's going to be very difficult to cover all the skills needed and to onboard them quickly enough. Just because even just finding the people with the skills will probably take a while and all that. And so then the other extreme is hiring a professional team, which some other big projects have done, but that's very expensive. So it's very expensive, and it also leads to some vendor lock-in issues, which leads to a bit of monopoly pricing and all that. So I think there is a path to a sort of a hybrid approach through a sub-DAO, where you can sort of get the best of both worlds and have big teams onboarded with a defined scope and some individuals as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think definitely it's kind of a difficult thing to say just now, but especially at this present moment in time, but agree that it kind of probably does need to be a hybrid approach in some sense. With that in mind, I guess many traders on dYdX push for like more markets, quicker speed of listings, like permissionless market listings. In your experience, like how do you balance this ask and the importance of like risk parameters first there? Like, is there a world where I guess speed and risk, there's obviously a continuous trade-off there and a balance between the two, but How do we optimize for both? And are there any examples in the DeFi world from your experience that you think do this well?
I think that's a really awesome question, but I would push back a little bit that they are opposed to each other, because where I would, because what I actually think, sort of formalizing the processes around how, say, sort of parameters are set and all that can actually lead to quicker market listings, quicker processes through governance, because for a few reasons. One, it takes a little bit of the burden off whoever's listing the new market, be it permissionless or permissioned or whatever, from having to set all these parameters themselves when it's not necessarily in their skill set and shouldn't actually need to be in their skill set to do so. They can sort of offload that to a pre-agreed framework. So that can definitely help things move a lot quicker. If there's clear frameworks and rails around managing risks, it can also give more confidence and freedom to move more in the permissionless direction potentially. A lot more work needs to happen to get to that point. But if every decision around this is ad hoc, it's very difficult for me to see a situation where it's safe to move towards permissionless markets or to onboard markets quickly, because there'll need to be a full audit of everything every time, and that's going to slow things down.
Yeah, I mean, Sorry, Craig.
Yes,
with permissionless market listings, like for you and traders similar to you, like is that an important thing? Like, or just having a structured thing where it goes to a risk group that's upheld on the protocol, like just a lot simpler way leads to faster listings or a few asset pairs going onto the exchange?
Again, a good question. I'd say my initial gut thought is that there could be an asset group that sets frameworks and clear bounds for setting these parameters, but they should probably also give it a little. I suppose if it's permissionless, they can't be the gatekeepers. But if it is permissioned, there's no reason why they can't give a second opinion, just running it through a model of their own as a secondary check. But if they are permissionless markets, I think there needs to be very clear bounds where it's almost like a lot of the rules around, and there are a lot of parameters that aren't covered in this particular report. This, to find the details of funding rates and tick sizes, and all of that makes a difference at the end of the day. If there's a clear guidance around how to set that and how that will set, and you just have to choose the trading pair and make sure that the oracle works and that it has X volume or something to that effect, I think that's probably the best approach. I can't see an approach where anyone is allowed to list markets and set them up however they want. That just seems like a guaranteed recipe for disaster and for some protocol bad debt to form somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Sorry, I interrupted your previous point. I'm not sure if you were going to touch on kind of any examples or any protocols or any DAOs that currently like manage this well.
Every DeFi protocol works a little bit differently. So there are and the risks are a little bit different. But I do like and again, I can't say that I follow every single one by a long shot, but I like the way that Aave does it, where someone will come and propose a market, and then there's third-party risk teams that will come and say, and the person who proposes the market can propose parameters, but ultimately the DAO is going to end up listening to these risk teams that give their recommendations on every single one of these new markets. I like that approach. It arms the community who are going to vote on the proposals with the information they need, in my opinion. This is what it's all about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just a few more from my side as well. Like for someone who's not very technical or overly familiar with any kind of risk practices, like say myself or just traders in general who are just familiar with the exchange, like how do we encourage the community to be more considerate and methodical with the factors here? Like, is it even important that they are aware of this, or is it again more so people like yourself who are in the weeds and understand risk to an nth degree, and therefore like they have certain, I don't know, permissions from a like a governance standpoint that sort of like don't involve that
Um,
sort of immediate community type of thing.
so, I think it's very important. One reason is that one goal of having frameworks like this is to actually increase trust of all of the stakeholders involved in the exchange. And when I say stakeholders, I primarily mean like the traders on the exchange trust that their funds aren't going to disappear for, in this case, some sort of economic issue. That market makers similarly feel that they're being protected properly, and that arbitrageurs, feel like they're being protected properly. Those are probably the three major stakeholders. So, if the risk parameters, if at least that they trust that the risk parameters are set correctly, then they will all probably give more volumes, and it will just add protocol value that way. So that's one way where I think it is important that maybe not every person needs to be all the way into the weeds, but they need to probably know enough that they can convince themselves that it's being taken care of appropriately. And then in terms of governance, the community ultimately needs to have enough knowledge and information to vote well. And intelligently. So again, there's a level of knowledge around how all of this works that I think does need to permeate.
That completely makes sense. I agree. And then just last two from me. Can you just briefly talk through this emergency powers for the DAO section in your paper? I think this is super interesting, and it'd be worth just touching on it briefly if you can talk on that.
So outlier events seem to happen every 5 minutes in DeFi at the moment, but even in any setting, there are always unexpected events that can happen, and the governance process, which is going to take a week or two to address any little one like that, makes the protocol very vulnerable in those kinds of situations. So I would advocate for a very clearly defined mandate for the DAO or a subcommittee or something like that to be able to act quickly. You don't want a situation like it's happened to Compound a few times where their token was getting minted in some sort of exploit, and they can only resolve this 10 days later. That can easily be resolved with like emergency powers, with a very clear, well-defined mandate as to how to act, and that they're able to act, almost immediately, and hopefully help protect against whatever we don't know today.
That makes sense. Thanks, Craig. I think from just this paper's questions, that's it. That's all I had from kind of a pre-populated questions. Carl, I don't know if you wanted to ask anything specifically, or if anyone in the audience wanted to ask anything. If not, we can probably briefly touch on kind of the recent grant as well.
Yeah, no, James, those questions were all awesome. I feel like we were able to cover pretty much everything that I had in mind as well. So would love to hear anybody from the community if they have it. If not, happy to also touch on this other one, although that one will probably merit its own AMA as well. But we can definitely chat about it too.
Okay. Anyone in the audience want to ask a question? Feel free to raise your hand. In the meantime, Craig, is there anything else that you think is important to kind of convey or touch on from the results of the paper, or risk in general?
I think your questions were really awesome, James. It covered pretty much everything. I can't think of anything that you didn't touch on there.
Right. Awesome. All right. Well, whilst we're waiting for anyone to raise their hand, it might be worth. Yeah, we will get you on hopefully for another AMA to talk through your new paper with 0xC-Chan. But it might be worth just giving an overview of what you've been working on recently, with kind of like the impacts of previous trading fee changes on volume, etc.
Yeah, sure. I don't want to steal too much of his thunder. So I'll save most of it. But yeah, we just wanted to see how different fee levels on dYdX affected trading volume. Basically, we thought about it a bit, and trading volume just seems like the logical metric to optimize for. That is as close to protocol value as we could get to. So we looked at it from a few different ways. We had a bit of a econometric model, which also isolated the impact of just general market sentiment and the attractiveness of trading rewards. Maybe if I just mention one of my favorite outcomes that came out of that is that there were certain times where if you just had to look at the data from a very high level, it would seem like at times when there was a time where a fee holiday ended and trading volumes dropped quite significantly at the next epoch. But once we really dived into the data, it didn't really appear significant after accounting for this attractiveness of the rewards and also this general drop in volumes across the board, which we sort of proxied with Binance volumes as such a large percentage of it. So that was one of my more interesting results that came out, because I didn't expect that from just looking at the data up front. Maybe save everything else for when he's around.
Yeah, brilliant. Really looking forward to that. Thanks for just touching on that. Okay. Real.
Yeah, I would add, Craig, if you want to chat about maybe like other ways that you're interested in contributing to dYdX going forward, now that you've done these two awesome papers, I think you have some things in mind, but I don't know if, where else could we benefit from your skills, or what's interesting to you, and before especially, right, there's going to be so many different areas that I imagine somebody like you could contribute to. Would love to hear more about your thoughts on the future.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carl. There's a lot of work to do to get the community ready to govern everything in B4. It's not any kind of slight on the community. It's more just the fact that dYdX trading has done a lot of the heavy lifting and updating and managing a lot of the fine details under the hood. So I've got a few other ideas around kind of similar risk research and primarily risk-related features, just to help try and contribute as much as possible to make the protocol as I'll call it as optimized as possible, because I don't, in my opinion, risk management is not about just restricting and saying no. It's about finding where the line is and setting a limit there. So that's actually the major part of risk management, is measuring the metrics that are important, tracking them, and then optimizing them. Because if you don't know where that line is, you either have to set everything really conservatively and the exchange is not competitive and suffers in that way, or run excessive risks. And I really believe in dYdX and DeFi values just in general, and I would love to contribute a bit more in that direction. I've enjoyed working on these two grants, so maybe some more in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think these two have been awesome, and that's great to hear. Super exciting stuff. Definitely, just so many interesting things from a risk standpoint coming up with these four, as you mentioned. think we're all very excited to have you contributing to the protocol and looking forward to all the other awesome stuff.
Likewise, I think you've been a really healthy addition to the community, Craig, and a well welcomed one. I know a lot of the team as well have enjoyed working closely with you, as well as the community have got really positive things to say. So, likewise, from what Carl said, looking forward to seeing your contributions ongoing. So exciting times.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot for the kind words, guys.
Yeah, I guess we're good to wrap up here. Yeah, thanks a lot, James. Thanks a lot, Craig, for everything. And yeah, if this inspired anybody to do research on some other risk parameter or some other topic with regards to dYdX, as always, please reach out to us either via the Grants Program Discord channel, submit an application at dYdXgrants.com, ping me, DM, email, whatever it might be, reach out in any way. We'll be sure to get back to you quickly with a response and chat about the idea. And yeah, we should have a few more of these coming up, so stay tuned for other updates on AMAs.
Brilliant. And Craig, if anyone wants to reach out to you, is the best thing just to kind of like DM on Discord?
Yeah, either Discord or Telegram. Discord's probably the easiest. And I don't, I can't say that I'm on it constantly, but I'll check it a couple of times a day. So you'll get a reply soon enough. And yeah, like anyone, feel free to reach out if you want to discuss any of this or something else related.
Awesome. I appreciate you staying up. I know it's late where you are, so thanks for coming on and discussing that paper. It was really insightful. And yeah, looking forward to the next one with 0xC Chan. Cool. All right, we'll close this down, and yeah, we'll see you all at the next AMA. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Carl.